Hi everyone, Jonathan back again here with what looks rather suspiciously like a Vickers gun. And I'll put you out of your misery if you've been playing our little guessing game over on social media. It is a Vickers gun. So you could always be right just by saying Vickers gun. But you know us by now, we like to choose unusual things. Now this isn't actually that unusual, but a lot of attention, well, the vast majority of the attention on the Vickers gun is in its ground role. I think it's safe to say. And certainly when I was thinking about what this is, which is an aircraft gun, I should just get that out of the way, I wasn't very familiar with what the different adaptations would be to run a Vickers gun on an early aeroplane. Now, unfortunately, this thing is not quite complete, and it's, oddly enough, we have some weird little doohickeys on here that you wouldn't expect to find and probably aren't on, not on most guns, put it that way. But there's a very obvious thing missing, and that's what's called the loading handle. Now it's called loading specifically, that's not just some weird British quirk. It not only connected to the crank handle to actually cock the gun, it also pulled back the moving parts, the whole assembly in the gun, including the barrel, that comes to the rear to actually operate the gun. Why did this handle do that? Well, this is a case of, this is a two-handed gun, we have to make it a one-handed gun. So you're sitting in a cockpit, you've got to cock your two guns, either initially, as you head off on a sortie, or once you've cleared a stoppage, you need to cock them. Well, you can't actually make a Vickers gun ready with one hand. But in this current configuration, you couldn't do that because you need to be able to pull the belt of ammunition across as you cock the gun twice. So to overcome that, the whole set of recoiling parts was, so the lock was cocked and the recoiling parts were pulled to the rear, and that essentially freed up the feed mechanism, pulling the belt across with only one hand. That's what a loading handle did, and that's why it's very frustrating that we don't have one for this. The most common type, if you want to go in and look this up, was known as the Highland HY loading handle, and you had the type, two main types, Type A and Type B. One would, you see this if you see cockpit footage and a vaguely realistic aviation movie of the time, what period footage. Depending on the installation, the handle would stick up or it would stick down. Now that's dependent on, ideally you would want it vertical, so you reach and cock it like that, and the German equivalent guns were arranged like that. But in installations like the Sopwith Camel, where you've got this cowling in the way, you can't have a handle sticking up, so you have a handle sticking down and you push it forwards instead, and it does the same thing. There's then a third type that's adjustable, so you can fit it into either aircraft, whether it's an SE5 or a Sopwith Camel, so the handle's sticking up or down. It's a simple flat steel bar in a curved shape, or a dogleg shape, with two nice but walnut grip panels on it. And we'd really like one. If anyone has one or knows of how to get hold of one, we'd love to get one to complete this very nice air service gun. There is the question of sighting. We haven't got time to go into that really here, except to say that the German guns typically did have sights clamped to the cooling jacket, as it now was. Some British installations did also have a ring with a crosshair in it on the gun itself. That's quite awkward because if you've got, it's alright if you've got one gun offset, as on the SE5, you just move your head and sight. Although increasingly they fitted the Aldis they call it a telescopic sight, but it's non-magnifying. It's more like a very early, I won't say red dot sight because it was a crosshair, but you get the idea. So ideally you'd have a sighting system in the middle. Some pilots even use the bracing wires as a reference point for aiming, depending how early you're talking. So sighting was a whole other issue to get into, and it's correct enough, depending on the gun this would be installed into, for ours to not have sights on it, just in case you were wondering. Other than the infamous interrupter or synchronization gear for not shooting off your propeller. Unlike the Lewis gun, which was used to shoot through propellers, astonishingly, without synchronization. Some of them were fitted angled off to miss the propeller, or more famously over the wing. But early on, 1915, early part of 16, there was some RNAS Bristol Scouts that were just shooting straight through the propeller. And all they would do is tape it up so that it didn't get too splintery. Absolutely astonishing. Not done for very long, but it was done. But the Vickers, as far as I know, was always, by the time it was introduced in the Royal Flying Corps, the Royal Naval Air Service, it was always going to be synchronized. So we won't get too much into synchronization in this. It's very complex, and there are a number of different systems that we used. The Sopwith Cowper system, notably, and the Constantinescu, or Constantinescu / Colley system is its full official name. I don't know what the contribution of Colley was, because he was more the sort of official British establishment side of the name. George Constantinescu, on the other hand, is a certified genius who did all sorts of stuff. Rock drill, he invented a rock drill, and the technology for that is what informed his synchronization system. And as I've started talking about it, let's just kick off with that right away. So we don't have the synchronization gear here. We do have one of those, or at least part of one of those, fitted to a gun on display in our First World War display in our main gallery in Leeds. If you'd like to come and have a look at that, we welcome that. What we do have, though, is the trigger motor. This is a Type C trigger motor, which is the 1917 vintage version of the motor, as they called it. And in very, very basic terms, the CC gear, as it was known, the Constantinescu Colley gear, was hydraulic, but it wasn't a straightforward incompressible liquid hydraulic system like a Caterpillar digger or something. It was sonic pulses through liquid. Absolutely astonishing, way above my ken, really. But so by pressing the firing control on the control column, you were turning on this system that would then send a series of rapid pulses, only the pulses would not happen when the blade was in the way of the gun. And that was done with a little cam that is constantly sending these pulses, timed correctly with the propeller so that the little lobe of the cam does not create a pulse when the blade might be in the way. Very, very clever. Doesn't quite make the gun semi-automatic, I wouldn't say. It's neither fish nor fowl. It's neither truly fully automatic, but it's not really semi either. It's more like an automated trigger. But that's a debate that's a philosophical / legal debate that I don't really want to get into. Suffice to say, the way it does it at this end, and you've got the attachment points here for the hydraulic hose, it simply drives a little pokey thing, piston effectively, against the trigger of the lock of the gun. We'll try and get you a view of that. So you imagine this little piston doing its job, bashing against the trigger of the... And by trigger, I mean the trigger on the lock of the gun, not the conventional thumb triggers that would normally be back here, that aren't here. Now, the early type trigger motor did just connect straight to the back of the gun and just poked the trigger that was normally there. And I suppose this is the point to say the very early Mark I Star Vickers, which is what the star denotes, air service, was even more of a ground gun with a few bits on it than this. It actually still had the sight bridge mounted to the top of this rear cover, which looks a bit like a sort of girder. If you look up a Vickers, I'm sure you'll see it. And then a long sight ladder lay across that. And you flip that up for normal use. Well, in air service, you can't even use that if you wanted to. So at first, they just left the whole thing on. I think I've seen photos where there's just the attachment point on the cover. And then after a few months, I think it was, they started producing rear covers where there is no sight bridge. And it's not the correct component term for it, but that's what I'm calling it. In fact, if I fully open the cover, you can see in here the little piston and the trigger. We'll get you a close-up of that. So this thing is beating against this. Obviously, it's not getting cocked until the gun has cycled. This is a recoil-operated gun, so the whole barrel and the side plates, everything is moving back and forth inside the gun and part of that cycle is to recock it. So by the time it comes back, the thing might be, it's pulsing away regardless of where the lock is, as I understand it. And then when the thing is fully in battery and is in contact with the piston, then that is the next shot that's fired. This is my semi-layman's understanding. As I say, it's actually a very complex bit of engineering. So the next feature that I'll talk about, I've already spoiled, because it's this sort of leaf spring here. Now, what you have to start thinking about here, getting your head around, is the Vickers gun on the ground could be operated by one person. You'd probably have some issues, especially without a suitable belt container. You've probably seen number 2 gunners on Vickers supporting the belt of ammunition to make sure it goes in smoothly. Now, that's part of the aircraft installation, is a suitable chute to properly support the belt as it comes in. Again, we don't have those attachments, unfortunately. But back to this clip. Again, we'll get you a view of this so you can see the hook that's on this side of it. All that does, you've probably figured it out by now after I've already put it up, but you throw up the rear cover and it isn't going anywhere. If you didn't have this little spring clip with the hook on it, this thing would collapse back down on your knuckle. I've just done it to my hand, in fact, and these are quite sharp. So the main thing to bear in mind, you are not in a team of 6, you are not even a team of 2 running a ground gun. You are one pilot, realistically. If you're operating a Vickers gun, you are going to be a pilot. It's going to be mounted either on the engine, 1 or 2, partly accessible, although as cowled in as possible as time went on, or it's going to be on the side of the cockpit. If you look at the RE8, somewhat of it's not like a cutting edge fighting scout or anything, and it has one Vickers gun mounted to the left side of the fuselage, so you're having to reach over the cockpit side to do anything with this thing. To cock it, to clear a stoppage, anything but fire it, because you've got a remote trigger to fire it with at least, and it's synchronized, so you're not shooting your propeller. Great. So you're one person, not multiple. You've only got one hand, and there are stories of pilots letting go of the stick, putting it between their knees to do various different actions. None of those are great options. If at all possible, you want one hand on your control column to fly, and then with this RE8 installation, you'd be doing all of this, loading, not so much firing, and then clearing any issues that you have, reloading if you're able to reload, all with your left hand. Not great if you're right-handed, as most people were. So this is great because instead of this flapping about, bad enough on the ground that this can sometimes close on your hand and get in the way, but with an aircraft that's pitching and rolling, and yeah, you get the picture. Also the airstream, the slipstream, blasting past 100 miles an hour or so, that alone is going to be enough to keep this down as you try to flip it up. So that's what that clip is for. There's one other little feature that's a little bit similar. So that's not the only spring that's in here, additional spring, I should say. Something else that was very useful, if you have to change a lock, and believe it or not, pilots did change locks. This is the heart of the Maxim or Vickers system. In midair, astonishingly. There's this spigot, this connecting rod here, will flop down. Now there are serrations on this so that with your thumb you can pull it up, but for air service, something else that they did was add in, rivet on another little spring clip, such that that rod is pointing exactly where you need it to be to whip out your spare lock and lock it into place. And then it's just you can just overcome the spring tension to get rid of it, and you can replace your lock that way. So tiny little component, really quite important if you're in the middle of a firefight in the sky. This is all a nightmare to even consider doing, but they did it. So we've got those two features. Trigger motor we've covered. We have also got, so there's something called the Feroto outfit. Now I don't know where the word Feroto comes from. We've got the inventors, I'll tell you about at the end. Their names are not Feroto, so I don't know where this comes from. It crops up in the official manuals. And part of that kit is this spring clip. I don't know if the one on the connecting rod is also part of that. They don't specify, but this certainly is. There's a piece of it we're missing, which is a rod that's used to actually clear jams. We can show you a picture of that, but we don't have one. I'm not aware of one anywhere else either. If anyone is, please let us know. Be easy enough to make a replica one. And then the sort of star of this Feroto outfit is this comedy spring that's attached to the crosspiece here, the spade grips, if you like, at the back. Now, this gun has only one grip. I've seen guns in installations still with a complete backplate. Certainly when they're using the early trigger motors that still require the firing trigger at the back. So where this is fitted, you must have one of the grips because that's how it's attached. And this, the actual grip is extended, and this is shown in the patent for this, to allow you to attach the spring. And it just sits there, looking not very pretty. So so the 1917 manual for the Royal Flying Corps for the Vickers, for the air service gun, mentions 2 of the 4 main Vickers gun stoppages, the second position and the third position stoppages, where this might actually be useful. In fact, it specifies the use of this spring, which is confusing me because I have never once seen a photograph of a gun on an aircraft with this spring fitted to it. And yet by 1917, it was supposed to be standard. It's not mentioned as optional. It's just meant to be, in fact, for the training purposes, the list of kit for this training session is Feroto outfit. So yeah, but we're still not there on this one. I might need to do some proper archival research to fully figure it out. But we now know, so with a Type 2 stoppage or second position stoppage, your crank handle stops roughly about here. Watch Rich Fisher's excellent video on Vickers gun stoppages from the Vickers Machine Gun Research Association. So second position stops about there. The third position stops just above the sort of in battery position there. And these are visual indicators that your gun has stopped. And there are different potential causes for that. We won't go into it. Watch Rich's video. But what this spring lets you do, you hook it over the crank handle and it's your third hand, basically. It keeps the crank handle in the position you want it in for, in particular, clearing a cartridge from the face of the breech. So a Type 3 stoppage involves probably a distorted case or a separated case, and to get rid of the bit that's still on the breech face, you would, with the help of this spring, pull it back to the rear with the cover open, use the other tool that we don't have, unfortunately, to get rid of everything that's in the way, and then you'd be able to close it up, remove the spring, and get it back into action. So in basic terms, that's what that spring is for. It's very sort of Heath Robinson, feels quite British as well. So we're nearly there. The more basic adaptation for the Mark 1 Star is to get rid of the water jacket. If you look at German MG08 and LMG08 air conversions for the Maxim gun for air service, it's almost like a greenhouse. They've cut away most of the water jacket because you're not filling it with water, you're relying upon the 100-mile-an-hour slipstream to cool the gun, which you did pretty well. The British approach was to cut holes in the front. A couple of different ways this was done. So you've got air coming in, and then you've got louvers sort of cut and dented all around the water jacket at the back. So turning it almost into a sort of not very good version of the Lewis's, the ground Lewis's cooling radiator system, only it doesn't have the aluminium radiator inside it. It is literally just airflow in, airflow out. So there's that. The advantage of this was it was potentially easier to reconvert back for, I guess, emergency ground use. At least I think that was the logic. And then we have at the front, so this is another 1917 vintage adaptation, the Hazelton device. So this is a specific form of muzzle booster. The Vickers always had a booster. You need that additional muzzle gas pressure to help force back, or to add to the recoil for reliable operation. But this was specifically designed to increase the rate of fire. Now, I've seen figures up to 850 rounds per minute claimed from about 600, 550, 600 was the standard ground Vickers rate. But actually, the manuals tell you that you should be aiming for a rate of 600. That's still significant though, because with synchronization gear, without a Hazelton device to speed it up, you are only running around 400 rounds per minute. So significantly lower rate of fire. Lower rate of fire means you've got less chance of hitting that aircraft. So still a very significant adaptation. So we've got an army of people involved here in modifying this thing. Never mind the designers and makers. And the final bit of tech on here, which I really will have to move the gun to show you, is a round counter. Now this was quite a late in the day adaptation as well, maybe late 17. I tell a lie. I do think this appears it appears in the 1918 manual, if I'm remembering correctly. And so this was, you would not preset this with whatever your capacity was, say 200 rounds. You would know how many rounds you had loaded in your aircraft, and this would count up. And so when it hit the limit of what you'd taken out with you, you'd know that your gun was out and not just jammed. And the way it works is pretty simple, actually. There's a rod, a rack and pinion, a toothed cog and a toothed rod that is attached to the recoiling parts, so to one of the side plates that moves back and forth as the gun moves, and it just shoves out through a hole in the back plate, and I can actually simulate that simply by, you can see there's a little toothed rod, the toothed cog, and if we are able to pull on the rod, this is rather awkward, but pull it out and let it go, pull it out and let it go, simulating it getting shoved. So, round counters, still not really a thing on military weapons at any rate, except for internal ones that are used for armourers, so that they know how many rounds a gun or a barrel or whatever component you want to track has fired. Round counters, Aliens style, to know how many rounds you have left. Interesting that that not only was a thing, but it was a thing in 1917-18. So I mentioned a patent for this, which is an amazing find. Really happy to find that. Details the, the Feroto part of this system. And that was invented by two chaps with the most RFC names possible. So Major A.C. Hartley and a Captain Sir R.A. Coote. Brilliant name, Coote with an E. And that was patented on the 28th, applied for on the 28th of February 1917. The same two guys went on to patent their own form of synchronization gear, interestingly, which doesn't seem to have caught on. I think the CC gear had already cornered the British market by that point. So we know quite a lot about, we know quite a bit about the air service guns. We know a bit about this bizarre Feroto system. We don't have very much about its actual use, this kind of spring thing and the weird little tool that we don't have. But there is at least one account of a pilot actually using it, which somebody had managed to find and posted online, which was very helpful. And I'll read from that. So that is Ross Smith in a combat report says, at the end of a burst of 100 rounds, that's very telling, got a high number 3 stoppage due to a Mark II disintegrating link fouling in the feed lock. Stoppage cleared with Feroto Jam Clearer. So it was not only in the manual, it was actually used, but I'm still really hazy on how many aircraft actually had it installed. Did Ross Smith have the spring aspect, or was he just using the handy little tool? Really still quite unclear. So it's amazing the level of, the number of little rabbit holes you can go down on what is on the face of it, a very straightforward air service adaptation of a very reliable and established already by that point ground service machine gun. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that one. There are ways that you can support us, but by far what we would appreciate the most, well, two things really. Firstly, like and subscribe and all that YouTube stuff. But secondly, we do have 3 museums that are, if you're in the UK, now or in the future, you should definitely come and visit. If you are in the UK this summer, we have a series of Elizabethan-themed events going on, horse shows in particular, and that culminates in an Elizabethan version of the joust, actual jousting with lances, which is something that we are known for and is well worth checking out if you never have. Not many places you can do that. Also, you can check out our various social media outlets through the website. So we really appreciate you. Catch you again next time.